The year is 2017, and in November of this year, it will mark the 100th anniversary of the Communist Revolution in Russia. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, but what would the world be like if the USSR suddenly reunited today? What would the Soviet Union look like if it existed today in 2017? To begin, let's think about what countries today used to be a part of the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union reunited today, it would completely encompass the countries of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. This obviously would make the modern Soviet Union a very large country, since Russia alone has more land area than the entire surface area of Pluto. Together, the Soviet Union would be bigger than Australia, Antarctica, South America, the Arctic Ocean, and the Southern Ocean, which makes the Soviet Union larger than 3 continents, 2 oceans, and 1 former planet. There are 11 time zones that would go through the USSR, so that means that if it was noon here in this part of the country, it would be 11 p.m. over here on the other side of the country. The Soviet population would be a very large 294,837,000 people, which would place the Soviet Union in 4th place in terms of population behind the United States. This is interesting because the Soviet population in 1991 was almost the same as it would be now at 293,048,000 people, which shows just how greatly the population in the region has been stagnant recently. The American population at the same time in 1991 was 248,710,000 people, which was smaller than the Soviets. But in the time since, the American population has greatly increased to nearly 319 million people. A majority of the people living inside the USSR would be ethnic Russians at about 46% of the population, with sizable minorities of Ukrainians, Uzbeks, and over 100 other ethnic groups. Russian would be the dominant language of the state just as it was during the Soviet times, as 58% of the population would be capable of speaking and understanding it. Russian would likely be the sole official language within the country, and a return to communism would have to take place in order for a true recreation of the Soviet Union to be possible. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union would be the sole legal political party within the country and would possess a monopoly on power. A return to state-sponsored atheism would be enforced, where believers would be free to practice their faith in private or in designated religious buildings, but all public displays of religion outside of these designated areas would be forbidden. Despite this, however, the Soviet Union would still have a very large religious population, with only 12% of the modern population claiming to be atheist or non-religious. 54% would be Orthodox Christians, another 3% Catholic, 24% Sunni Muslims, 3% Shia Muslims, and a final 4% of multitude of other diverse religions. The capital city would be located in Moscow, the present capital of Russia and the largest city of the modern Soviet Union. To add up to the top 5 largest cities in the country, we would add St. Petersburg, which would be renamed back to Leningrad, as well as Kiev, Tashkent, and Minsk. The Soviet economy would be pretty large at $2.034 trillion US, placing it as the 8th largest economy in the world. Russia currently is the 12th largest world economy, so the Soviet Union would jump ahead of countries like South Korea and Canada but remain stuck behind India and France. The GDP per capita inside the country would be fairly low at just $6,899 per person, which would place the USSR all the way down at 76th place ahead of Bulgaria but behind China. This somewhat large economy would, however, greatly support the Soviet military with a budget of $80.4 billion, the 4th largest budget in the world behind Saudi Arabia, China, and the United States. What the Soviets would lack in funds, however, they would make up for in sheer size, with a force of 1,436,000 active duty soldiers, the 2nd highest number in the world behind China. But the USSR would have an additional 2,884,000 soldiers placed in reserves, giving the Soviet military a potential size of 4,320,000 soldiers in the event of mobilization, a force almost as large as the entire population of New Zealand. A fully mobilized Soviet military would be about the same size as a fully mobilized Chinese military, and would be 42% larger than a mobilized American military. The Soviets would also possess the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, with 7,300 warheads compared to just 6,970 American warheads. In addition, the USSR would be by far the largest oil-producing country in the world, outpacing both Saudi Arabia and the United States with a production of 12,966,000 barrels of oil every day. If we get a little more ambitious with this and decide to add all of the former territory that once belonged to the older Russian Empire into the modern Soviet Union, some interesting things begin to happen. To do this, we would add all of Finland, a very large chunk of Poland including the capital Warsaw, and all of Alaska. Doing this would raise the Soviet population up to 313,496,000 people, which would be nearly equal to the United States. Her GDP would be dramatically increased to $2.541 trillion US, now placing the USSR as the world's sixth largest economy, ahead of both India and France, but still remaining behind the United Kingdom and Germany. The added land would make the Super Soviet Union about the same size as the Mongol Empire was at its height. The difference in size between the two empires would only be an area about the size of Montenegro. All things considered, the Soviet Union likely wouldn't quite be the superpower that it once was. It would have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, the second largest conventional military in the world, and would be the world's largest producer of oil, but would be shackled by a struggling economy and a stagnant population growth. The United States and NATO would almost certainly be hostile to a resurgent Soviet Union, so the USSR would have to seek allies elsewhere in Asia and Africa. It would likely be the cause for resuming the Cold War, or the start of a Cold War II that could have global consequences. The Soviet Union's very geography would likely determine how she would interact in the modern world.
The Soviet Union's expansion was partially a move to spread the socialist revolution, but it was also a bid to protect Moscow. You see, every bit of Russia's border is protected with geography, except for here. This is the Northern European Plain, a flat 300-mile-wide stretch of land that funnels an invading Western European army right up to the gates of Moscow. By gaining influence in Eastern European countries, the USSR was able to create a zone of buffer states between Moscow and Western Europe. Not only is the Russia of today weakened by its lack of buffer states, but it is also condemned by its geography because it has no ice-free deepwater ports with direct access to an ocean. That means it's hugely expensive to ship Russian goods out of the country, and their navy can't properly function without the permission of NATO countries and allies. I talk about all of this in much more detail in my video over at Wendover Productions, which you can find here.
Please make sure to go ahead and check out that video next, as this video was done in a collaboration with both Wendover Productions and Alternate History Hub. Make sure to leave your comments below about what you just watched, and if you enjoyed watching this video, then I sincerely hope that you'll subscribe to my channel by clicking here. This video was selected to be made by people over at the official Real Life Lore Patreon, which you can go to and vote on future video topics by clicking here. Don't forget to give this video a like if you enjoyed it or a dislike if you didn't, and I'll see you next week for another new video then.